of the hatchery ultimately is to raise shellfish seed to be put back into our local bays to replenish stocks that have been taken by either us, have been affected by changes in environment or diseases that affect shellfish seed. So to get to this point here, first we start out culturing the food for our shellfish. And here is some algae that we grow. It's photosynthetic drifting microorganisms that the clams feed on. So these clams here are what are called our broodstock clams, our adult clams that we're going to spawn and that will release eggs. Those will be fertilized and then it will go on to be the seed. So every day we'll feed our animals, and then after 2 months' time in here, we'll be ready to spawn our animals. And now let's go over to our spawning table. Okay, at this point, we're ready to spawn the animals to get them to release their eggs. And we put them in this tank here. We have a candle here for a little ambiance to help them to spawn. We raise and lower the temperature. They release their eggs, and then they're fertilized. Now, we don't see the spawning happening here, but I have the spawn on videotape and the larval cycle. So let me show you that. Up on the screen here, this is one actual clam that is spawning. And coming off of here, those are the millions and millions of eggs that are released by the clams. And they release millions and millions of these because they're cast out into the water column where it's just by chance that they'll be fertilized. Here in the hatchery, we could contain all these eggs, and that's how we grow millions and millions of shellfish seed each year. So those are the eggs, and then by the next day, they become shellfish larvae, which is a free swimming stage. So whether it's a scallop, clam, or oyster, they go through a 2-week cycle, a larval cycle, where they're free swimming. These are some eggs here. And then by 24 hours later, they're at what's called a D stage veliger. And now they're swimming all throughout the water column. There's another stage there. Here's a closer shot of it. You can see there, that's what's called the velum. And the velum is the organ that, it's its swimming organ, and it's also its mouth, basically. It draws in food. Here is the last stage of a clam larvae. This coming out right there, that's its foot. And this is what's called the pediveliger stage. At this point, it has both a foot and a velum. It has the ability to crawl and to swim. So when it finds a spot that's suitable for it to stay for the rest of its life, it's going to cast off the velum and then become an infaunal organism where it's going to burrow into the ground and remain there. And here's a shot of a set clam right there. And then quickly I want to show you live organisms real quick. There's some scallops, here's some clams, and here's a little baby scallop that's only about a millimeter in size. And now we're going to go to the last stage, to the nursery culture with Kim Tetro.
Well, here we are in the nursery, and the nursery is where the shellfish seed that we grow here is brought out and grown to a larger size. So right in front of me here I have some silos where we grow our oysters, and inside here you can see some oysters in the silo. On the other side you can see that there's a mesh that lets water up through the bottom of that mesh and feeds these oysters that are growing in there. And they're all different sizes and shapes, and they're growing merrily, eating the algae that's in the water, being force-fed with these pumps, what we call a floating upweller off the docks here. In this silo, here's about 50,000 seed clams that were grown from the larvae, and now there's that as they're getting bigger and getting ready for planting out in the wild in probably another couple weeks. And again, this silo has that mesh bottom on it that allows water to go up from the bottom. Now these oysters, when they're growing, they grow at a different rate a lot of the time, so what we often do is we run them through a machine called a culling machine, and I've got my quag students here waiting to be culling the machine, so we carefully turn the machine on and we throw some oysters in there, and what's happening now is that the machine is spinning around and it's sorting the oysters into the different sizes which drop down to the bottom into these totes. And there's going around and around. What we can have happen then is we have our students here with their calipers, and they measure the oysters for size and jot down the measurements. And so you can go ahead and measure a couple of those oysters. What that's doing is that allows us to get a rate of shell growth, how they're doing out in the wild, what size they're getting. And that's just one of the activities that the school groups have been involved in here. They actually grow their oysters. They've got their cages, which they can put the oysters inside of, have little gardens growing, if you will. And that's also part of, let me turn this off so you can hear a little better. Thank you, group, there. What happens is that we've got a program called SPAT here at Cornell Cooperative Extension. That stands for South Hole Project in Aquaculture Training. And what that allows us to do is teach all members of the community how to get involved with not only growing shellfish, but being in tune with the environment and how their participation will help the environment.